On today's Join Us in France, how the Marais neighborhood in Paris almost got razed to make room for a monstrosity. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit of a scary story. A story of how the city of Paris almost lost a big chunk of the Marais neighborhood in the 3rd and 4th arrondissement of Paris. Okay, Join Us in France listeners. You have been researching your trip to France. I know this for a fact because otherwise you wouldn't be listening to me right now. You're excited, and I know that because lots of you let me know that, and that's great. But now it's time to book your hotels. I recommend that you do that via booking.com. It's the booking engine that I've been using for a long time. It works great. It offers hotels at every price range in every town, village, or area in France you could think of, and they offer some amazing deals. I always check them out first. Now, if you're not driving, you can look at your phone right now, and among the show notes, you'll see a booking.com link. If you click on that link and you book your hotels from your phone, Join Us in France will get a small commission. If you prefer to book from your computer, which is me, I prefer that, visit joinusinfrance.com and click on one of the booking.com boxes. And that will take you through to the research and booking area where Join Us in France gets a small commission. Now, what do we do with those commissions? Well, we pay for hosting, and once in a great while, there's enough to pay for a new piece of hardware or software that we need to produce the show. It's small amounts, really. Elise and I need to keep our day jobs. But if you remember to use booking.com via Join Us in France, just like Amazon.com, it shows that you care and that you want to keep the show going. And even better, for every new episode I produce, I will add the names of my favorite hotels in that city or area. I will also go back and add them to previous episodes so that when you look at the show notes for an episode, you'll see a list of hotels that Elise and I recommend in that city. How cool is that? And you know what else? You don't even have to book a hotel in France for this to work. You could be booking a hotel to go to a wedding or a business trip or anything, and it would work the same. All you need to do is remember to visit joinusinfrance.com and use the booking.com box. And thank you very much. Now, Elise told us about the Marais in episode 27, and she went into great detail on the history of the area, the highlights that you should visit when you go. She talked about La Place des Vosges, which is beautiful. All the good stuff that she always talks about when she comes on the show. I'm not going to repeat all of that. I'm just going to give you enough of a quick refresher so that if you don't remember episode 27, which was a while back, you will have everything you need today to understand the shocking story of how the Marais was almost razed that I'm about to unfold for you. The Marais in Paris is a quaint, beautiful neighborhood that goes over the 3rd and 4th arrondissement of Paris. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's on the right bank of the Seine River, and that means that if you want to find the right bank and the left bank, you face west. If it's now your right, now the right bank is to your right and the left bank is to your left, but the trick is you have to face west. The Marais used to be a swamp area, hence the name, which means swamp in French. Marais equals swamp. There have been people living there since the 1100s that we know of, so it didn't stay a swamp all that long. Many of the streets and houses are medieval in the Marais because they were built in the 1400s and 1500s or even earlier. That means narrow streets, half-timbered houses, beautiful, charming medieval. The beautiful Place des Vosges was built in the early 1600s, and that's when the nobles of Paris moved into the Marais neighborhood in large numbers. The Middle Ages are now over. Various kings and their children and siblings moved to the Marais. They commissioned many hôtels particuliers in that area. What's a hôtel particulier? It's a very, very fancy and very large single-family home. It's not a hotel at all, okay? But they are amazingly beautiful. They cost a fortune to build, and this was the home of many of the most noble and wealthy French people of the 1600s. In the Marais, you can visit many of those gorgeous hôtels particuliers. For instance, Hôtel de Sully, Hôtel Carnavalet. This one houses the Musée Carnavalet in Paris. The Hôtel de Sens. This was built in the late Middle Ages. I love the look of it. It's right at the border between Middle Ages and more modern times, and it's beautiful. The actual name is Hôtel des Archevêques de Sens. And today it's the home of the Forney Library, which specializes in posters and advertising, and I'm told is a wonderful is a wonderful museum. I haven't seen it. That's for my next visit to Paris. Hôtel de Lamoignon is also another one. This one houses the Paris Historical Library. Hôtel de Soubise, it houses the National Archives today. So there are a lot of those that you can go into for a small fee or even free, some of them. So look into that if you're interested. Those are beautiful, charming, historical places with they have so much charm that you could sell some. Okay, that's a French expression. Du charme à revendre. They have so much charm that you could sell some. They have extra to sell. Beautiful, beautiful places in the Marais. But by the 1700s, and the golden age of the Marais lasted more or less 100 years, the Marais fell out of favor with the rich and the noble, who all wanted to move to Faubourg Saint-Honoré, Faubourg Saint-Germain, where they had more room for bigger and better homes and gardens. Many of them also moved to Versailles, right along with the French court. By the time the French Revolution came around, so that was 1789 through 1799, all the rich people have moved out of the Marais, making room for other people. So the people moving in are artisans, workers. They use all these gorgeous courtyards as workshops, and they really have a convenient and wonderful location in Paris to call their own, which is great for them. Then from the end of the 1800s until the Second World War, many Ashkenazi Jews move in, more or less 110,000 of them, so that was a lot, and they were fleeing the persecution and poverty of Eastern Europe. They mostly congregated around Rue des Rosiers, which is a neighborhood called Pletzel, and I'll give you a link to that in the show notes. In the 1800s, Paris went through extensive renovations known as the Haussmannian era. But most of those renovations bypassed the Marais, which kept its narrow streets and old infrastructure. Some dilapidated houses were torn down here and there, but for the most part, there are no Haussmannian-style buildings in the Marais. So that's the area. Grand in the 1600s for 100 years, still has many mansions, but mostly medieval houses, narrow streets, old infrastructure, sprinkled with a few renovated houses here and there, but largely a place for immigrants and blue-collar workers where nobody invested a lot of cash for a long time. In other words, the neighborhood started to look a little disheveled. It also bears to remember that during World War I and World War II, the construction sector in France went absolutely dormant, particularly in occupied France. There were no men around to build anything, and people didn't want to start. I mean, a war is not a good time to start, oh yeah, I'm going to build my dream house, That's not what you do. the country fell behind in terms of housing, and it became really, really difficult to find a place to live for young families and young couples. Never mind affordable, there wasn't much to be had to begin with. During World War I, France had such shortages in the workforce that they asked the Chinese government to send laborers to France, and China did. Many of those men settled in the northwest sections of the Marais. Many of these men, some of them brought wives and children, settled in the northwest section of the Marais. Many of them stayed and still live in the area. So there's a little bit of a Chinatown flavor to it. You've probably heard of the Marais as a gay area. In the 80s, so that's the 1980s, the area gentrified through the efforts of many, many gay couples who moved in and invested in the Marais. Now, this has happened in many cities, and Paris is no exception. Gay couples move in, open fashion boutiques, cafes, restaurants, hotels, B&Bs, businesses of all sorts. They pour money into the area and make it look nice again. It worked so well that by now, it's really hard to afford the rent in the Marais. It's a really expensive area of Paris, and Paris is one of the most expensive cities in the world. So it's truly very expensive. So the Marais is safe for now. Nobody's going to tear it down to build anything horrible. So how things changed in France between the 50s, where the Marais was in great danger of having a giant wrecking ball taken to it, and the 80s, where it turned into this beautiful, very sought-after area. It's just unbelievable how fast things went. To understand what was happening in the 50s, you have to know that there were a lot of cultural changes taking place in the 50s in France. After the horrors of World War I and again World War II, the ideals of modernism took hold in France at every level of society, from the most modest French working class to the intellectuals. People had a thirst for everything new. French people wanted a future with modern housing, an automobile, appliances, and a more equitable society. This is the area of big societal changes like the establishment of the Sécurité sociale, which in France is not about retirement but about health insurance for everyone. Somehow, everyone agreed that health insurance should be run by the government for the betterment of all. I'm not sure that would pass so easily today at a time of much greater individualism, but it worked post-war. In the 50s, France had a serious housing problem and a thirst for modernity. French people wanted to move to the cities, and there weren't enough homes to house them all. Also, housing in the cities had not been improved on very much. So what do you do to provide lots of housing in a hurry? Apartment buildings. Lots of them. When you drive through rural France today, you still see this problem unfolding. You have homes that are in the center of villages that nobody is taken care of. And those homes can get to the point where they just need to be torn down. They can't be helped anymore. And this was going on a lot in the 50s in France. It still goes on. Not anymore in Paris. Trust me, Paris doesn't have much of that going on at all. But villages all over France do still, because it's hard to find people willing to invest, $100,000 to renovate this house that they can't sell it for near that or rent it. It's really hard to convince people even people who inherit those houses. It's a big decision. Do I invest in this or do I let it go? Because maybe they don't want to go personally. If they want to go personally, that's a different matter. But if they don't enjoy the area, don't really want to go, what do you do? Anyway, so this is a big issue all over France. But back to our apartment buildings. The prophet of apartment buildings, one of them anyway, was Le Corbusier. You've heard of him, I am sure. He was a Franco-Swiss architect and urban planner who had a great love for all things hyper-planned, rectangular, with great big thick highways, making life easy for cars, and preferably made of reinforced concrete that he wanted to look like concrete. He made proposals for such developments all over the world. He called his proposal for Paris the Plan Voisin, and he worked on it starting in 1922 and finishing it in 1925. And then he made changes to it all the way until 1940. Le Corbusier is a controversial figure, and he was at the time as well. He was a control freak who thought it was up to the architect to decide how people should live inside of his buildings. He was intransigent and single-minded. There's not much controversy about that. Many people also say that he was an authoritarian and an anti-Semite. I don't know about that, but it's definitely one of the accusations that you hear about Le Corbusier quite frequently. Seeing that he did a lot of his work in the 20s and 30s at a time when Hitler was spreading his ideology and people were buying it, it's not so surprising. Lots of ideas that we find unsettling today were in full bloom at the time, all over Europe and the US. For example, eugenics were gaining popularity. In the US, the KKK was vibrant with activity. People were obsessed with pure races. You can see it really clearly in dogs and horses, but they also thought it applied to people. So keep all of that in mind. Le Corbusier's proposals for Paris were to raze most of the old buildings in the Marais and a lot of the right bank of the Seine, to build a complex of freeways and skyscrapers that I will not hesitate to qualify as a monstrosity. What he had in mind was 18 cross-shaped skyscrapers of 60 stories each, a massive freeway running through it. And when you see the picture, and I hope you go see the picture on joinusinfrance.com/103, you will ask yourself, don't those look like kind of swastika shaped? And even if you don't think that, it really looks like something out of a dystopian novel. And you can just see the novel. I love the dystopian novels, by the way. You know, it's like, I can picture this area with a dictator putting on a big show and all of that. I'll put a link to a picture of what he had in mind and also a video that shows an animation of what it was supposed to look like. These towers could house up to 700,000 people. The total population of Paris proper today is 2.2 million. Intramuros, as they say in French, that means within the city. So 700,000 is 30% of Paris's population today. It would have been a bigger percentage then. It would have been huge. He called it Le Plan Voisin, after Gabriel Voisin, who was another visionary, but in the area of aeronautics. I suspect that the fact that the word voisin means neighbor and gave this warm feeling to an otherwise horrible, cold place probably played into it as well. You just have to see the picture in the 3D video. It's unbelievable. It's 18 identical skyscrapers all lined up. It's, awful. Does that mean that I think Le Corbusier never did anything nice? No. I think he did some nice stuff. And as a matter of fact, his ideas are pervasive today in the kind of cube houses that I've mentioned before on the podcast, which are thankfully losing steam in France. But in the year 2005 through 2010, that's all that was being built. All the new construction was these kind of juxtaposed cubes with flat roofs. Very, very strange for France. I don't love them, but lots of people love them, and I respect that. It's a look, it's a look. I think Le Corbusier designed nice individual homes. He also pushed for large balconies and large windows, and to me, that's positive. But when it came to large-scale projects, I really don't understand how he didn't see how inhumane and cold it all looked and must feel. But raising the Marais to put that thing up would have been a terrible crime. Yes, a crime. A crime against charming old houses that are such a pain to renovate, but worth it all the same. People were nuts about modernism. This started in 1945 and didn't really stop until the 80s and 90s. Anything old and in poor repair was at risk. Any old housing occupied by poor people in a prime location was also at risk. People wanted to move forward and didn't really question what it would do to their heritage. When they looked back at proposals to raise much of the Marais and the temple area, saving a few churches and hôtels particuliers only to make room for a grand freeway project and lots of buildings. So long as there was a promise for modern housing for a good price, they were all for it. In the 50s, there were some grumblings about using Le Corbusier's plan, which had been proposed in 1925 and rejected in 1925. It might have worked, but for the lack of funds. But what really stopped it, what turned people's hearts away from doing such things, is surprisingly a young engineer with a hobby. His name was Michel Rode. He didn't set out to go on a crusade against anything in particular. He just liked history and he liked music, and he decided to create an association that would put on a music festival in the Marais. This was a wonderfully original idea at the time. Music festivals are really common in France by now, but his music festival started in 1961, and it brought a lot of people into the Marais, walking the streets, organizing events, going to attend musical events, and these people realized what a gem the Marais is. That's what it takes, really, is for people to realize that they have a gem. Sure, the gem might be a little bit old and it might not look so nice anymore. It needs help. It needs a lot of TLC. But you know what? It's still a gem. These buildings are amazing and wonderful, and they need to be preserved. Le Corbusier is not the only one that proposed really bad plans for Paris. There are many, many more that I could go into, but I won't. But the one that did go through and is a shame is the destruction of the Halles de Paris. You remember, Elise mentioned this in one of the episodes. I don't remember which one, but it was a huge deal. Paris had this ginormous food market right in the center. Today, it's the area called Les Halles. And this food market was really in bad repair and needed to be fixed up. They decided it was easier to build something else outside of Paris and tear it down to make room for something new. And that's exactly what happened. By doing that, they got rid of some really beautiful food market buildings that should have been preserved, that should have been renovated. Les Halles de Paris moved to Rungis, just outside of Paris, in the late 60s. And 2 years later, they started demolishing the old buildings. What they put in its place is nothing as crazy as what Le Corbusier had in mind, however. So, but still, they should have preserved Les Halles, the original Halles, and turned them into whatever they wanted to, but preserved the outside of the buildings. Les Halles Baltard in Paris were an Art Nouveau style building that housed the original Halles de Paris, and it was gorgeous, and it really needed better sanitation, but they could have done it without tearing them down. That's what I'm saying. Okay, now, that's going to be it for me for this topic. But before I go today, I want to add a tiny bit of information about things that are very likely to happen in France in 2016, spring and summer. The French government is trying to make changes, quite significant changes to laws regulating employment in France. And this has French people up in arms like you wouldn't believe. Another French podcaster named Patrick Béja invited me on his show to talk about this, and he likened it to the attachment that Americans have to guns, which seems irrational to a lot of the rest of the world. Well, French people are attached to their employment laws in that same irrational way. French people don't see it, but outside they're like, oh, why do you think this is going to work? Anyway, so that's the situation. And I predict that unless the government withdraws the project, which they say they won't, there are going to be a lot of strikes, especially in the public sector in France this spring and possibly into the summer as well. What I recommend is that you have a plan B, which is always a good thing anywhere you go travel. My favorite plan B when it comes to transportation in France, if the train system is on strike, which is likely to happen quite a bit, if Air France also, starts to go on strike, they haven't so far, but you never know, then use the bus. Lots and lots of new bus routes in France. Those are not owned by the government, so these are not state employees. They don't have the kinds of protection that state employees have, and they don't go on strike for the most part. So listen to episode 75. Listen to episode 75 again, and that'll prepare you for whatever might happen. Have a plan B, and also install the Uber app on your phone before you come to France, because you might need that to get around even within Paris, etc. And coming up on the Join Us in France Travel podcast, next episode is going to be a trip report with Sergio, who is from the Boston area, if I remember correctly, and he had an amazing whirlwind tour all over France. And the episode after that is going to be with Elise again, and it'll be on Montpellier, a beautiful, beautiful city. You don't want to miss that. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you very much for listening to the show and for supporting the show. And au revoir. If you enjoy the show, let us know. Many thanks to listeners who donate to the show or use our Amazon and hotel booking links on joinusinfrance.com or on the show notes on your phone. Most people who find the show do it through a recommendation from a friend. If you share the show with a friend, let me know so I can fuss over you and thank you properly. The other way people learn about the show is through mentions on TripAdvisor, travel sites, and blogs. Thank you for dropping our name here and there. It really helps, and I'll be happy to fuss over you also if you let me know. Thank you. Have a great time in France. And when you come back, consider sharing your experiences in France with the other listeners. I really enjoy doing trip reports with you. Au revoir.